You've forgotten the language of your soul. The language it spoke to you as a child. Remember that time when your inner voice was clear and loud? When you could tell right from wrong, true from false, alive from dead. Then something irreparable happened. The world began to speak to you in a different language, the language of duty, conformity, accommodation. And your inner voice became quieter and quieter, until one day you couldn't hear it at all. Society creates in you a second I, adaptive, functional, convenient for the system. It learns to suppress the impulses of the authentic one, to cut off impractical dreams, to avoid inconvenient truths. This second self is perfectly capable of surviving, but it does not know how to truly live. It exists in a mode of constant self-limitation, not to stick out too much, not to be too different, not to feel too much, not to desire too much. The alienation from the true self happens gradually and imperceptibly. First, the child learns to restrain his natural impulses in order to gain the approval of significant adults. Then a teenager gives up his uniqueness in order to fit in with his peer group. Then a young person chooses not what ignites his soul, but what will bring stability and social approval. Finally, the adult completely forgets that he or she once had his or her own desires that were different from the expectations of others. But deep inside remains the memory of that original language. And from time to time your soul tries to reach you in that forgotten language. You feel a strange restlessness, incomprehensible longing, inexplicable desire to leave everything and start again. This is your soul trying to remind you of who you really are, trying to awaken in you the memory of your authentic path. The inner markers of authentic living exist in each of us. It's a state of flow when time disappears and you completely merge with what you're doing. It's the feeling of expansion when you step outside the familiar boundaries of yourself and get in touch with something bigger. It's an inner stillness where there is no doubt or anxiety about making the right choices. These markers are your natural compass, your personal truth detector, a unique tool for navigating a world of infinite possibilities. When you are on your path, the body knows it before the mind does. You feel a surge of energy, clarity of thought, spontaneous joy for no reason. This is not euphoria or artificial enthusiasm. It is the natural state of a person living in alignment with his or her deepest nature. Conversely, when you deviate from your path, the body signals it with fatigue, illness, a vague feeling that something is wrong, even if everything looks perfect outwardly. You have not lost the ability to speak the language of the soul. That ability is only temporarily drowned out by the noise of everyday life, buried under layers of social conventions. But it's still there, inside you, waiting for the moment when you decide to remember. When you find the courage to stop, listen and relearn to recognize the subtle nuances of this ancient language. Returning to your authentic self begins with recognizing a simple truth. You don't have to be who you were taught to be. You are not the product of your upbringing, the result of social conditioning, or the sum of the roles you play. You are the bearer of a unique message that only you and no one else can convey to the world. And your task is to remember the content of this message and find the courage to share it with the world. Every personal myth has its light side and its shadow. What we recognize and accept in ourselves becomes our light. What we deny, repress, and are afraid to see goes into the shadows. But what is denied does not disappear. It only loses its connection with consciousness and begins to live its own life, determining our behavior, bypassing our conscious choices. Your shadow is not an enemy to be defeated. It is a rejected part of you that needs to be integrated. It's the part of your personal myth that you refuse to include in your story because it didn't fit the image you wanted to create of yourself. But the personal myth only becomes whole and alive when it includes all aspects of your being, not only the noble and sublime, but also those that seem dark, selfish, or primitive. Jung said that the shadow is made up of those qualities that the ego refuses to recognize in itself. This could be anything from aggression and sexuality to creativity and spiritual aspirations. The point is not the content of the shadow material, but the fact of its rejection. And the paradox is that it is often in the shadow that our most valuable resources, our unexpressed possibilities, our sources of vitality are often hidden, which we have cut off from ourselves in an attempt to conform to what we thought we should be. The displaced shadow does not disappear without a trace. It is projected onto the outside world. You begin to see in the outside what you refuse to recognize in the inside. You find enemies who embody the qualities you've repressed in yourself. You build relationships in which your partner compensates for your unexpressed sides. You create situations in which you are confronted again and again with aspects of reality you are trying to escape. Encountering the shadow can be painful. It takes courage and honesty to see things in yourself that are contrary to your usual sense of self, to recognize qualities in yourself that you have condemned in others. But it is only through this encounter that the path to true wholeness opens up. Only by accepting all parts of your being can you free yourself from inner conflict and find that inner harmony which is the basis of true strength. Integrating the shadow does not mean indulging destructive impulses. It means realizing the full range of your possibilities and freely choosing how to realize those possibilities. It means transforming blind, unconscious power into conscious creative energy. The accepted and integrated shadow becomes a source of vitality, spontaneity, and creativity. A rejected shadow becomes a source of self-destruction, compulsive behavior, unconscious sabotage. Many people fear their authentic strength more than their weakness. Strength requires responsibility. It confronts you with choices. It makes it impossible to hide behind the role of victim of circumstances. It's easier to stay small, invisible, safe. It is easier to blame external circumstances than to recognize that you yourself, consciously or not, create your reality. Your personal myth only gains power when it includes everything you are, without exception. When you stop fighting yourself and start using all the energy available to you for creative expression. When the darkness and light within you no longer oppose each other, but complement each other, creating a three-dimensional, living, breathing reality. To remember your myth is to remember yourself as a whole, without censorship, without selecting what seems acceptable. It means seeing your face without a mask and accepting it for what it is. In this acceptance comes self-love, not narcissistic narcissism, but a deep respect for that unique blend of light and shadow that makes up your unique essence. Your personal myth does not exist in a vacuum. It is woven into the grandiose fabric of archetypal stories that humanity has been telling itself since the beginning of time. These stories are encoded in the collective unconscious, and they manifest themselves in myths, fairy tales, and religious teachings of all cultures and eras. Archetypes are universal patterns of psychic energy, the primary images that structure our experience and give it meaning. Each of us, to a greater or lesser degree, lives archetypal stories: initiation, the hero's journey, meeting the shadow, integrating the anima or animus, finding the self. The only difference is whether this happens consciously or unconsciously. When you begin to recognize archetypal patterns in your life, your personal experience gains depth and connection to something larger than individual existence. The hero's journey is one such universal pattern, described by Joseph Campbell after studying myths from around the world. This path begins with a call to adventure, an inner or outer impulse that pushes the hero out of the familiar world into the unknown. This is followed by trials, encounters with helpers and adversaries, descent into the underworld, symbolic death and rebirth, and finally the return with the gifts gained on the journey. This archetypal structure is present not only in epics and movies, but also in your life. Every meaningful transition, every crisis, every transformation follows this ancient pattern. When you realize this, you stop feeling like a victim of chaotic circumstances and begin to see a pattern, a meaning even in the most painful and confusing periods of your history. You are not the first to go through the darkness of misunderstanding, to lose ground under your feet, to face your own demons. Countless heroes of myths and legends have traveled this path before you. And it is their stories that can serve as a map for you, helping you to navigate the space of inner transformation. Archetypes manifest not only in grandiose events, but also in everyday life. They are present in relationships with parents, in romantic liaisons, in attitudes toward work and creativity. Mother, father, lover, sage, warrior, child, trickster, all of these archetypal figures live inside you and are projected onto the outside world. They shape your expectations, influence your choices, and color your perception of reality. Recognizing the archetypal basis of your story does not rob it of its uniqueness. On the contrary, it gives you a deeper understanding of your unique role in the universal drama. You don't just follow a universal pattern, you embody it in a unique way that is possible only through your individuality, your experience, your special combination of qualities and circumstances. Overcoming external and internal obstacles is an integral part of the journey. External obstacles are obvious: environmental resistance, misunderstanding of others, material limitations. But the internal obstacles are much more serious: fear of the unknown, self-doubt, attachment to comfort and security, internal conflicts and contradictions. It is these inner dragons that guard the entrance to the cave where your true treasures are hidden. Every meaningful step toward your authentic self requires sacrifice. You need to leave something behind in order to move forward. It could be an outdated identity, a toxic relationship, limiting beliefs, a false sense of security. Sacrifice is not a loss but a transformation. You let go of the lesser to make room for the greater. You die to the old version of yourself to be born again. Your personal myth is your version of the archetypal journey. It is the unique pattern you weave into the great fabric of human history. To remember this myth is to realize your place in the cosmic drama of becoming, to recognize yourself not as a random clot of matter, but as a necessary part of the great whole, without which the picture of the world would be incomplete. Why is it so hard to remember your authentic myth? Because we live in a world of artificial narratives that constantly override the voice of our inner truth. Social constructs shape not only our external reality, but also our view of ourselves. We look at ourselves through the prism of other people's expectations, cultural stereotypes, and imposed standards of success and happiness. The modern world has created an entire industry of identity production. Marketing sells not products but images of the self. Media do not form an information field but a certain worldview. Social media creates not platforms for communication, but mechanisms for comparison and competition. All of this pushes you away from your authentic self, replacing living archetypal content with flat templates and blanks. Cultural narratives control us more subtly and effectively than any overt form of coercion. They do this through creating an artificial consensus about what is normal, desirable, right? They shape our desires by convincing us that we want exactly what they suggest. They create the illusion of choice by hiding the fact that all the options offered keep us within a certain paradigm. The most dangerous manipulations have to do with fundamental human needs: belonging, security, recognition, meaning. The fear of being rejected, of being on the margins, of losing status or security becomes a powerful lever that can be used to make people give up their authenticity and submit to external demands. You carry a lot of implanted beliefs that were never the result of your own experiences or choices. You take them as a given, as part of objective reality, without thinking about their origins. These beliefs are about who you are, what you are entitled to, what is possible for you and what is not, what is valuable and what is meaningless. Recognizing the true from the imposed is not an easy task. It requires a special inner work to distinguish between the voices. What voices are in your head when you make decisions? The voice of your parents? The voice of society? The voice of significant others? Or your own voice, quiet and barely discernible beneath the chorus of other voices, but the only one that knows your true nature? The first step to liberation is to realize the extent of one's conditioning. You need to recognize how deeply social narratives have penetrated the structure of your thinking, perception, and emotional response. This is not an occasion for blaming or feeling victimized. It is simply an acknowledgement of a fact that opens up the possibility for change. It is important to realize, remembering your myth is not a process of creating something new, but a process of clearing away. You peel away the layers, take off the masks, cut away the superfluous to reveal what has always been underneath: your original nature, your essential identity, your authentic voice. This requires a certain degree of disintegration. You have to allow the old identity structures to disintegrate so that a new, more authentic version of you can manifest. This process can be disorienting and frightening. You may temporarily lose your sense of self, find yourself in a space of uncertainty where the old no longer works and the new has not yet formed. This is a necessary stage of transformation, the dark night of the soul that precedes the dawn of new consciousness. Remember, remembering is not a linear process. It is a spiral where you return to the same themes again and again at different levels of understanding. With each new turn of the spiral, you see more deeply, understand more clearly, integrate more. And gradually, step by step, you unleash your authentic voice from beneath the layers of other people's stories. True remembering is impossible in the noise of a crowd. It requires solitude, not so much physical as inner. It requires the ability to be alone with oneself, to hear the silence in which the most important insights are born. In a world obsessed with sociality, the ability to be alone becomes a lost art, and with it the ability for deep self-knowledge is lost. We fear solitude because in silence all that we so diligently muffle with external activity surfaces: unresolved conflicts, repressed emotions, existential anxiety, uncomfortable questions about the meaning and direction of life. It's easier to fill space with noise than to face that inner reality. It is easier to be constantly connected to others than to risk being alone with oneself and discover that there is a stranger lurking beneath the layers of social masks. But it is in solitude, in this sacred space of encounter with the self, that true dialogue begins. Not the monologue of the ego, but a dialogue between the different parts of your being, between the conscious and the unconscious, between the everyday self and the deeper self. This dialogue cannot be heard in the din of everyday life, in the stream of other people's opinions, in the endless tape of information noise. There is a fundamental difference between isolation and creative solitude. Isolation is a state of detachment, separation, alienation. It is loneliness from fear, from the inability for true intimacy, from inner emptiness. Creative loneliness, on the other hand, is a space of possibility, a fertile ground for deep self-knowledge and authentic self-expression. It is a solitude from wholeness, from an inner richness that requires time and space for its manifestation. The transformational power of conscious solitude lies in its ability to redirect attention from the external to the internal. When you get out of the mode of constant reactivity to external stimuli and allow yourself to immerse yourself in your own inner reality, the contours of your true myth begin to emerge. You begin to discern the images, plots, and themes that make up your unique story. In the silence of solitude, the whispers of intuition, the voice of inner wisdom, and the call of destiny become audible. These are not loud commands, but quiet, subtle signals that can only be recognized in a state of deep inner peace. These signals often come not in the form of clear verbal messages, but in the form of bodily sensations, spontaneous images, unexpected insights, meaningful coincidences. Learning to recognize these signals is like learning to tune a fine musical instrument. It takes patience, practice, and a willingness to return again and again to this state of silence and mindfulness. Gradually you begin to recognize more and more subtle shades of inner reality, more and more deep layers of your being. And it is in this depth that the memory of who you really are, beyond social roles and adaptive strategies, is hidden. Many great insights, creative discoveries, and spiritual revelations have happened in solitude. It is no accident that prophets retreated into the desert, mystics sought out secluded caves, and artists created isolated studios. They intuitively understood that the connection with the source of true inspiration is established only when the external noise subsides to such an extent that the inner voice becomes audible. In today's world, with its cult of hypersociality and constant connectedness, the ability to engage in authentic solitude is an almost revolutionary act. Disconnecting from the flood of news and notifications, spending a day without social media, giving up the constant need for validation and approval, these simple acts can be the first steps to reconnecting with your own depth. Loneliness is not just the absence of others. It is the presence of self. A complete, undivided presence in the moment where nothing distracts from the encounter with one's own essence. In this space of presence, the most valuable insights about who you are and why you live are born. In this space, authentic recollection of your personal myth begins. But for solitude to be fruitful, you must learn to be in it without fear or resistance. Many people, left to themselves, immediately fill the space with artificial substitutes for communication. Television, the internet, meaningless activity. Real solitude requires courage to face one's own shadow, unresolved inner conflicts, and existential fears. Solitude can become a door to a new dimension of self-discovery only if you enter it consciously, with the willingness to see yourself as you are, without masks and defenses. Only then it turns from a frightening emptiness into a fertile bosom, where new opportunities, insights, and directions of development are born. The journey of remembering is rarely painless. Pain is often the catalyst that forces us to stop, to listen, to reconsider habitual patterns and beliefs. Pain tears away the shroud of illusion, exposes the true nature of things, and forces us to ask the essential questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What really matters? Our culture teaches us to avoid pain at all costs. We have created an entire civilization of pain management: physical, emotional, existential. Painkillers, entertainment, consumption, constant busyness, these are all ways of not feeling, of not facing that part of reality that seems too intense, too demanding, too uncomfortable. But pain is not just an unpleasant sensation to be eliminated. It is a signal, a message, an indication of something that requires our attention and transformation. Physical pain signals a breakdown in the integrity of the body. Emotional pain is about unmet needs of the soul. Existential pain is about the discrepancy between how we live our lives and what we are meant to do. Rethinking suffering as a catalyst for growth is not about romanticizing it or deliberately inflicting suffering on ourselves. It is about recognizing that pain is an integral part of the human experience, and rather than spending all our energy avoiding it, we can learn from it, to allow it to be a guide to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world. In the alchemical tradition there is the principle of solve et coagula, dissolve and thicken. First the old forms must break down, dissolve, so that matter can then be reassembled into a new, more perfect form. This principle applies to spiritual transformation as well. It is often the painful experience that dissolves old identity structures, outdated beliefs, limiting patterns, making room for a new, more authentic way of being. The most profound transformations often occur precisely through the dark night of the soul, a period of profound crisis, loss of meaning, destruction of everything on which the former identity was built. This time seems endless while you are in it, but it is in this darkness that the seeds of a new consciousness germinate. It is there, at the bottom of the well of despair, that you can find the key to your true myth. Every major loss in your life is an invitation to greater wholeness. When you lose your outer support, you are forced to turn inward, to find the support within yourself. Losing illusions about yourself and the world frees you to face reality, however uncomfortable it may be. By losing your habitual identity, you get a chance to get in touch with your essence that lies beyond all identifications. Moving beyond the cycle of suffering does not mean moving away from pain. It means changing your relationship to it. Instead of seeing pain as an enemy to be avoided, you begin to see it as a stern but wise teacher, pointing out what needs healing, transformation, integration. You stop being a victim of pain and become its student, learning valuable lessons from every painful experience. It is not the pain itself that we suffer most, but our resistance to it. When we stop running away, when we turn to face what frightens us most, an amazing thing happens. Pain does not destroy us but transforms us. It becomes the fire in which illusions burn away, making room for the authentic. It becomes the pressure that turns the coal of our ordinary consciousness into the diamond of awareness. To remember your myth is to include all versions of yourself. Not only the strong but also the weak. Not only the victor but also the defeated. Not only the giver but also the needy. It means recognizing that each of your wounds is not just a scar, but a door through which a special gift, available only to you, enters the world. And that gift becomes part of your unique mission, your message to the world. Within each person there is a whole cosmos of opposites. Male and female. Light and darkness. Creation and destruction. Order and chaos. Logic and intuition. Action and contemplation. These polarities create an inner tension, a dynamic that can be a source of either inner conflict or creative power, depending on how you learn to handle these opposites. Our culture tends to be split and oppositional. We are used to thinking dualistically, either slash or black slash white, right slash wrong. We divide reality into opposites and force ourselves to choose one side. But true wisdom begins where we are able to hold the opposites, not trying to reconcile them or choose between them, but recognizing that both sides of any polarity are necessary aspects of the whole. Masculine and feminine energies exist within each person regardless of biological sex. Masculine energy is associated with direction, focus, structure, analytical thinking, and action. Feminine energy is associated with receptivity, intuition, creativity, emotional intelligence, being. A fulfilled personality integrates both of these, not allowing one to suppress or supplant the other. In the process of socialization, we often learn to suppress one of these polarities in favor of the other. Boys are taught to suppress feminine qualities, emotional sensitivity, intuition, the need for intimacy. Girls are taught to limit the manifestation of masculine qualities, assertiveness, ambition, autonomy. These limitations create internal imbalance, which later manifests itself through projections, compensations, neurotic patterns of behavior. Reclaiming one's myth means regaining access to all aspects of one's psychic reality, including those that have been denied, repressed, or simply left undeveloped. It means getting to know your inner masculinity and inner femininity, recognizing the value of both and learning to move flexibly between them depending on the demands of the situation. Harmonizing opposites does not mean merging them into a homogeneous mass. Rather, it is about dynamic balance, the ability to preserve the uniqueness of each polarity while recognizing their interdependence and complementarity. It is like a dance where the partners preserve their individuality while creating something greater than the sum of their individual movements. In ancient traditions, this idea was expressed through symbols reflecting the unity of opposites. Yin-yang in Taoism, the union of Shiva and Shakti in Tantra, the alchemical marriage of the sun and moon. All these symbols point to the same truth. True wholeness is not achieved through the annihilation of one of the opposites, but through their dynamic interaction, creating a third dimension, the dimension of integration. This applies not only to masculinity and femininity, but to all other polarities within us. Introversion and extroversion. Rationality and emotionality. Spontaneity and discipline. Each of these pairs creates tension that can be a source of inner conflict, but can also be transformed into creative power if we learn to hold both poles in consciousness without identifying